Imagine yourself standing on the deck of a longship, cutting through the leaden waves of the North Atlantic. Behind you lie weeks, if not months, of journey into the unknown. Ahead lies the legendary Vinland, promising wealth and a new life. And all around you are only salty spray, a piercing wind, and the boundless ocean. What did these fearless warriors and explorers eat on their journey? How did they manage to feed an entire crew far from their native fjords, without any canned goods or especially refrigerators? The secret to the Vikings' survival is hidden not in their battle fury, but in the genius of simplicity and the centuries-old wisdom that allowed them to store provisions for years. This is the story of how a harsh climate and ingenuity gave birth to technologies that rivaled modern ones in their efficiency. Ready to uncover ancient secrets? Then let's set sail. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Many more amazing discoveries await us ahead. Life in Scandinavia during the Viking Age was an endless battle not so much with people, but with nature. The short, cool summer and long, bitter winter dictated their cruel rules. To survive meant not just to grow and harvest a crop, but to preserve it, stretching meager supplies over long months of darkness and cold. And if it was a matter of a large-scale expedition, when a fleet of dozens of ships with hundreds of rowers and warriors set out into the open sea, the question of provisions became a matter of life and death for the entire enterprise. A hungry warrior is a weak warrior. A hungry sailor is already a corpse, thrown into the embrace of Aegir, the old Aesir god of the sea. It was this harsh necessity that forced the Scandinavians to hone ancient preservation methods to perfection, turning them into a true art form. They could not afford the luxury of relying on luck. Each piece of dried fish or barley hardtack was the result of meticulous work and a deep understanding of the forces of nature, which they both feared and revered. Their philosophy was simple: to conquer the elements, one must first learn from them. And they learned. Their pantries and longship holds were not just storage spaces, but strategic arsenals on which the outcome of a campaign and the fate of an entire clan depended. The most common and reliable way to preserve meat and fish was dehydration. Picture a windy spring day on the shore of a Norwegian fjord. The air is crisp and salty to the taste. The women and elders left in the settlement after the return of the fishing boats begin the most important ritual. With knives as sharp as a wolf's tooth, they gut the freshly caught cod, halibut, or heron, carefully cut the carcasses along the spine, and flatten them. Low wooden frames, drying racks, are quickly filled with these fish wings. Now the main allies are the relentless north wind, bringing dryness with it, and the low northern sun. It doesn't roast, but rather dries, pulling all the moisture from the flesh, moisture in which rotting bacteria love to multiply. After a few weeks, instead of juicy fish, you get a hard, almost stone-like slab, stockfish. It could be stored for years, and before eating, it was enough to beat it with a hammer and boil it in a pot of water or add it to a stew. This was the bread of sailors, their main protein ration. The same was done with meat. Hardfiskur, dried mutton, was no less popular. The meat was cut into long, thin strips and hung under the roofs of longhouses, where smoke from the hearth aided the process, giving the treat a lightly smoked aroma. This method was so effective that it allowed not only for surviving the winter, but also for forming a strategic reserve for future campaigns. Dried meat and fish became a kind of currency, a universal product that could always be taken along, be it a trek across mountains or a months-long voyage to the shores of Britain. If drying was the work of the wind, then smoking was the magic of fire. This process was considered much more sacred and complex, requiring not only skill, but also a certain reverence for the element. For a Viking, fire was not just a tool, it was a gift from the god Loki himself, cunning and dual-natured, capable of both warming and destroying. Special smokehouses, often located at a distance from dwellings, were low, almost dugout-type structures with a hearth inside. The fuel was not any wood, but specific types, mainly alder and juniper, which produced thick, aromatic but not hot smoke. The meat, pre-salted or soaked in brine, was hung on poles under the very roof, where it slowly soaked in the smoke day after day. The smoke acted as a powerful antiseptic. Phenols and other substances in its composition killed microbes, creating an impermeable film on the surface of the product, while the process of gradual salting and heating rendered out the remaining moisture. The result was incredibly aromatic, dark, almost black meat, with a rich flavor, a true delicacy for a stern warrior. It didn't need to be boiled. It could be eaten right away, on a break, washed down with beer or mead. The smell of smoke mixed with the smell of cooking meat was the scent of home, safety, and prosperity. It was a smell that a Viking remembered on distant campaigns, and one that lured him back to his native hearth through any storms and battles. But what to do with foods that cannot be dried or smoked to a stone-like state? Milk, whey, even meat. The Vikings' answer was genius and desperately bold. If you cannot stop spoilage, you must lead it and direct it in the right channel. They were not only warriors, but also subtle biochemists, managing fermentation processes. The most striking example is their legendary surströmming, or, simply put, fermented herring. The fish was not dried, but lightly salted and tightly packed into barrels with a small amount of brine. Then these barrels were buried in the ground or sunk into the cool waters of the fjord. In conditions of salt shortage and low temperature, the process of lactic acid fermentation began. Bacteria that usually cause rot were suppressed, and beneficial lactic acid cultures began their work, preserving the product and creating a unique, nuclear-sharp taste and smell. This sour, intoxicating fish was a real vitamin bomb, saving them from scurvy on long voyages. They did the same with meat, creating something like hakkarl, rotten shark meat, which is still considered a delicacy in Iceland today. The carcass of a large animal or shark was butchered, placed in a special pit fermenter, weighed down with stones, and left for weeks, sometimes months. During this time, the meat went through a stage of controlled decomposition, after which it was dug up, aired, and eaten. This was food for real berserkers, a test for the spirit no less than for the body. But such a product could be stored for an incredibly long time and possessed monstrous energy value. The very nature of Scandinavia provided the Vikings with the most reliable and simple refrigerator, permafrost and ice. The interior regions of Greenland, Iceland, and the highlands of Norway stored ice in their depths even in summer. The Vikings were masters at building ice cellars, deep pits dug into the permafrost or lined with turf and granite. These structures, also called jordhus, meaning ice house, were the forerunners of modern refrigeration units. The temperature inside never rose above zero. Here, they stored everything that needed to be kept fresh not for years, but for months. Carcasses of freshly slaughtered animals, milk, whey, cheese. The entrance to such a cellar was carefully sealed with a heavy stone slab or a thick layer of turf to preserve the precious cold. In winter, they stockpiled ice and snow, compacting it in deep pits and covering it with straw and skins for use in the warm season. Imagine a farmstead deep in a fjord. While the summer sun weakly warms the moss on the roof of the longhouse, beneath it, in the stone stomach of the earth, lies a block of last year's ice, safeguarding the family's supplies. This was not a survival technology, but a way of life, the ability to fit into the rhythms of nature, to use its pulse for their own needs. They did not fight the elements, they formed a tactical alliance with it, and ice was their faithful ally in this centuries-old war against hunger. The foundation of the Viking economy and daily life was livestock. This meant milk and its derivatives were a key element of the diet. But fresh milk sours in days, and again the Vikings found an ingenious solution. They didn't just churn butter, they clarified it, obtaining melted butter, smeat. It was melted in large cauldrons over a low fire to evaporate all the water, then strained to separate the pure fat from the protein impurities. The resulting golden liquid was poured into ceramic vessels or even into cleaned animal stomachs, where it solidified into a hard, waxy mass. Without access to oxygen and moisture, such butter could be stored for years, even decades. Archaeologists have found vessels of butter in the bogs of Scandinavia that, despite the centuries past, were still edible. This was a strategic fat reserve, a source of calories and vitamins, ADE. It was taken on campaigns, taxes and tributes were paid with it. Cheese was made hard and salty, and then often smoked for good measure, resulting in a product whose hardness and durability rivaled stone. It could be gnawed on a campaign or grated into a stew to add satiety and flavor. And curdled milk and fermented milk were stored in wineskins. It was both a drink, a food, and a medicine for many ailments, sustaining strength and health during the long winter months. Grain was another staple of life, but grain is vulnerable to moisture, mold, and rodents. The Vikings stored it in large chests, arks, reinforced with iron or in pits coated with clay. But for long sea voyages, a product was needed that wouldn't spoil from salty spray and constant rot.